breaking, U.S. court rules Trump tariffs unlawful. Media silent on shocking details. Canada is confronting one of the most significant economic crises in decades, yet Prime Minister Mark Carney's leadership is coming under intense criticism. Instead of keeping Parliament operational throughout the summer to respond to urgent economic challenges, Carney chose to suspend legislative business and focus on public appearances, including ceremonial events and the familiar barbecue circuit. Critics argue that this decision sends the wrong message at a moment when Canadians are facing rising living costs, shrinking paychecks, and growing debt. The contrast is stark. While families and small business owners struggle to make ends meet, the government appears detached, prioritizing optics and routine appearances over concrete action to stabilize the economy. Observers say this creates a sense of abandonment, undermining public confidence in the government's ability to manage crises effectively. A major driver of the economic uncertainty is the ongoing trade tensions with the United States. Recently, a U.S. appeals court ruled that many of former President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs were unconstitutional, citing a lack of legal authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. While this ruling was a legal setback for Trump, it offers little immediate relief for Canadian exporters. The tariffs remain in place at least until mid-October as the Republican-majority Supreme Court considers an appeal. This means that Canadian manufacturers, exporters, and small businesses continue to face punishing costs, compounding the pressures of inflation, rising interest rates, and volatile consumer demand. Despite widespread media coverage framing the ruling as a potential economic reprieve, this optimism is misleading. The decision only affected a portion of Trump's trade measures, leaving tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other essential goods untouched. These tariffs, imposed under national security provisions, continue to strain Canadian manufacturing hubs, particularly in cities such as Hamilton, Windsor, and Sault Ste. Marie, where industries depend heavily on U.S. trade. In addition, Trump revoked the low-value shipment exemption, which previously allowed small Canadian businesses to send packages under $800 without incurring duties. This change has devastated small exporters, forcing cancellations, lost sales, and in some cases, permanent closures. The impact is tangible. Local entrepreneurs, many of whom have invested years of effort and capital, now face financial ruin due to regulatory and trade obstacles entirely beyond their control. The stakes are enormous. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business warns that up to 40% of small businesses could close within a year if current conditions persist. These statistics represent real people, families losing income, workers facing unemployment, and communities losing economic vitality. Even the closure of a single plant in Ontario may displace 100 workers, immediately affecting hundreds of lives and multiplying stress across local economies. When this pattern is repeated across thousands of small businesses nationwide, the ripple effects threaten the broader economy, reducing consumer spending, shrinking tax revenues, and placing further pressure on social support systems that are already stretched thin. Canada's vulnerability is not solely the result of Trump's trade measures. It reflects a decade of strategic mismanagement by successive Liberal governments. Long-delayed or cancelled infrastructure projects, particularly the expansion of east-west pipelines, have left the country overly dependent on U.S. markets for energy exports. This reliance limits Canada's economic independence, leaving industries exposed when protectionist policies or tariffs are introduced. Critics argue that had Canada invested in alternative trade routes and infrastructure, it would have more flexibility to weather external shocks, support domestic manufacturing, and maintain a stronger bargaining position internationally. Mark Carney himself once projected confidence that he could navigate the Trump era effectively, securing better trade terms and shielding Canadian businesses from harm. Yet, months into his leadership, no substantial concessions have been achieved. Worse, Carney recently claimed that no further negotiations are necessary because Canada already has the best deal, a statement that critics argue ignores the ongoing and immediate suffering of Canadian enterprises and workers. Meanwhile, Canadians continue to struggle with stagnant wages, rising inflation, and the uncertainty of employment, highlighting the disconnect between political assurances and economic reality. The employment situation further underscores the urgency of action. Statistics Canada data show that while June 2025 briefly produced modest employment gains, these were erased in July, leaving overall employment flat for the year. More troubling, most of the lost positions were full-time jobs, the type that provides households with stability and security. For families, this translates to difficulty paying rent or mortgages, covering school expenses, and affording basic necessities like food and healthcare. In this context, the decision to suspend Parliament rather than legislate solutions is widely seen as tone-deaf and indicative of leadership that is reactive rather than proactive. Trump has made it clear that he intends to uphold existing tariffs wherever possible and is likely to explore new trade measures if any legal challenges undermine his previous actions. This ongoing uncertainty places Canadian businesses in an incredibly vulnerable position, as they cannot simply rely on U.S. courts to provide timely relief or protection. Critics argue that Carney's government has failed to present a coherent, proactive strategy to defend exporters, small businesses, and workers from these external shocks. Without immediate and decisive intervention, the economic fallout will continue to spread, weakening domestic investment, eroding consumer confidence, destabilizing local communities, and threatening the long-term resilience of Canada's economy. In summary, Canada is losing jobs, small businesses are collapsing, and manufacturing towns are under siege from ongoing tariffs, duties, and trade barriers. Families face mounting financial pressure, local communities risk decline, and the broader economy teeters on the edge of contraction. Yet, instead of responding with urgency, Mark Carney's government has largely retreated, leaving Canadians to question whether this is the leadership the country requires during one of the most critical economic periods in recent history. The combination of external trade pressures and internal strategic missteps threatens to define Canada's economic trajectory for years to come, highlighting an urgent need for decisive, forward-looking leadership, an element critics argue is currently absent under Carney's watch.